Hello Reddit readers, today we have very interesting stories on the timeline. I will not detain you anymore. Like and subscribe to the channel of pleasant viewing. Story 1 from user The Law of Pizza. The 90s and 2000s were a perfect blend of comfortable analog life and the tantalizing promise of a digital future. It was a time when you could go to the mall and literally be disconnected from everyone. But the friends you met there, your parents couldn't call you, your work couldn't call you, none of you were staring at a screen, texting people who weren't there. It was just you, mall rats, your shopping, and the food court. But it was also a period when you might have a beeper or an early cell phone or a Palm Pilot, things that were amazing at the time and made you feel like you were living in the future. It's hard to convey that feeling to somebody who has grown up in the digital era, but try to imagine living in a world where getting separated from your friends at the mall meant an hour of searching for them, store by store, and then suddenly having a small flip phone you call them on. It was just advanced enough to be incredibly useful, without being advanced enough yet to consume you. It was a time when every year brought insane leaps in technology, jumping from 2D graphics to fully 3D voodoo-powered wonder. Think about it. This period literally went from Super Mario World to Batman Arkham Asylum. These were real, genuine, and exciting things to look forward to, rather than just the year's new iPhone with a slightly enhanced camera that you only pretend to see the difference in the internet itself was still a new wild frontier. It hadn't been captured by huge corporate interests yet, and wasn't overrun by the lowest common denominators spamming social media for clicks and dollars. There simply wasn't a big financial incentive. Yet so everybody who was surfing those digital waves was just there to have fun. It's a time that will probably never come again. Story 2 from user Cobra52. It was weird looking back on it. That whole decade was a massive transitory period across technology and culture. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan felt forced and unnecessary, but almost everyone went along with it. After 9/11, the first half of the decade was filled with fears of terrorism, coupled with an aggressive surveillance state. There was definitely a boom period before the recession hit. And when it did, everything came crashing down. By the end of his presidency, Bush was almost universally hated. I feel he didn't maintain decent approval ratings for long after winning his second election. Most of the decade didn't have smartphones, and the internet, while becoming much more utilized, felt more like an accessory than something you had to have access to in order to function. Social media sites just started taking off in a big way, but no one had any idea what they would turn into. Hardly anything used digital distribution. And the things that did felt a little wacky. Organizing your MP3 files took much more effort than today. Most people still got news through TV or print sources, and no one saw the reckoning they were about to face in the coming years. Urban styles, hip-hop rap, R&B, all dominated popular culture for most of the decade. It was a massive transition from the grunge styles of the 90s. There was a lot of color and a lot of very big collars on shirts, I think. Because of the war on terror, there was a general weirdness with movies and TV. Everything felt oddly sanitized but filled with little meta jokes that all started changing when the superhero craze took off around the turn of the decade, and pop media became almost standardized. Cheap reality TV became extremely popular IMO because it was cheap, but also because it skirted around dealing with what the world in general was going through. At the time, Flavor Flav isn't going to make any comments about what's going on in Iraq. The 2000s don't really start until 9/11 and lasted until the recession and Obama winning the White House. It was a weird time. The post-Cold War boom of the 90s was over, and now we were dealing with a new war on terror. It culminated in a recession which devastated a huge portion of the middle class. It was the last time people weren't connected. 247 through smartphones, and most information was still gotten from basic TV and paper news. Pop culture had to content with the fact that we were occupying a foreign country, leading to a weird doublethink. In a lot of cases, if you ever wonder why millennials are a little weird, that's why it was a weird time to be growing up and going into adulthood. It was materially decadent, but austere and empty for anything meaningful. Story 3 from user Situchi. Phones were dumb. The war in the Middle East was turning from patriotic to cluster people still hung out in person. Way more than on PC messaging apps. Nu metal and rap rock were a big thing. Everyone had a ton of DVDs, but people also burned music CDs. If you had money, you had an iPod. Gas got expensive during the 2007 crash, but in the early 2000s, it was close to $1 per gallon. Cash for clunkers hadn't happened, yet so cars were ridiculously cheap. You could pick up a crappy one for a few $100s, and a lot of the time, if you were mechanically inclined, you could work on it yourself to keep it running. Internet started off crappy, but quickly got better. As that happened online, gaming took off prior to that. If you wanted to game with your friends, one of you had to haul your PC over to the other's place for a LAN party. File-sharing sites were big at the time because Spotify wasn't a thing yet, and Apple Music was just starting teen movies, glorified drinking and partying. So a lot of cheap beer was consumed. Weed was still illegal though, so occasionally people would have their lives up over a joint. Oh, sexist and homophobic remarks were commonplace. Calling guys homophobic slurs was the norm. Also, Chappelle's show made a lot of white kids a bit too comfortable with the N-word. Rent was pretty cheap though, so that was nice. Like $250 for a room in a shared house, or $500 for a smaller one-bedroom. McDonald's had burgers for less than 50 cents on certain days. Online porn was mostly photos, not videos. Digital cameras were a big thing, but cell phone cameras sucked. Film cameras were quickly dying in popularity. Early internet was wild. Literally, it hadn't been monetized fully. Yet so it was a random mess of people starting their own sites, people sharing pirated material, or people using chat rooms to lie to people all over the world. ASL stood for age, sex, location. It was a common thing to ask people when there was a chat room with several dozen people with random-ass usernames. However, meeting someone from the internet sounded like meeting a serial killer to older generations. The idea that you might talk to someone you don't know on the computer, then actually meet them in real life, sounded crazy to them. Story 4 from user Lumpy Branch 552. Let's see, I turned 18 in 2000. Cell phones were starting to get really popular where most people would have one. I got my first one in 2001 and seemed late to the party. They had this thing called roaming though, where you were charged a lot extra if you were out of network or calling outside the hours in your plan. Cell plans would often have free nights and weekends perfect for a young person, but not a business person. Texting wasn't really a thing until 2005. And it seemed like a strange concept, but that soon became really popular. Cameras on phones took really bad pictures. Disposable cameras were slowly dying out, and digital cameras were what most people used. Fashion was flair, jeans, messy parts, until the side part craze in the late 2000s. Low-rise pants were extremely low, like 1-inch zippers. Everyone wore rubber thong sandals, sometimes with a wedge. Those are coming back, layering tank tops and shirts on. Each other was very popular. Designer jeans were super popular brands like 7 for All Mankind, Juicy Couture Rock, Republican True Religion, Citizens of Humanity. There were a lot of cargo pants and cargo shorts for guys. A lot of people shopped at Abercrombie Fitch Hollister. American Eagle Ugg boots became wildly popular for women in 2003. I managed to nab a pair of classic shorts, but Uggs were sold out across the country. MySpace was the platform in 2005-2007, and then Facebook started taking over. MySpace had a lot of bugs, and the fake profiles were overwhelming. Although I loved how I could design my own MySpace page and got really into it. Facebook didn't have that options. Facebook did have things called apps that you could decorate your page with to an extent. Like one was a cork board with little buttons you could choose from called pieces of flair, like Office Space. But it wasn't the same. I didn't have internet in my phone for the entirety of the 2000s. I had to be at home or go to a coffee shop. We printed out directions from a site called MapQuest. No Google Maps, CDs were still a thing. But some people started to get MP3 players and iPods. There were also music sharing platforms like Kazaa, LimeWire, etc. You had to be careful what you downloaded though. Kazaa gave my computer a zillion viruses. I also once spent 24 hours downloading what I thought was Snoop Dogg Doggy Style album, but it ended up being porn. Oh, and this TV streaming shit and Roku, Hulu, Netflix. Hell no, there were regular TV channels and cable. A boyfriend of mine climbed an electrical pole and got us free. Cable Netflix did exist, but it was a DVD you'd receive in the mail. Watch it and send it back in the mail. There wasn't much direct deposit either or online bill. Paying you get a paper paycheck that you would take to the bank. Bills were paid with checks that you put in an envelope and send in the mail. There's more may come back and edit this. Story 5 from Yus Rubersooner. Went into HS in 2000 and graduated college in 2009. For me, the aughts were great. I have lots of fond memories of my own young adult days. Things definitely seemed a bit freer, and I am happy to have the life I had. But if I am being completely honest, I'm not sure I would want to go through it again. The 2000s was basically the birth of the 24-hour news cycle. Just a steady, non-stop stream of BS 2000 shitshow election, 9/11 war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Katrina global financial crisis. The list goes on and on. We were lucky that phones and social media were still in their infancy. Escapism was much easier back then, but even then, you could sense a low-grade anxiety in the air. Not unlike today. Even though my memories were good, you were never too far separated from the chaos of the world. I remember the absolute fear that gripped everyone after 9/11, and my Muslim Arab classmates being bullied while school admin did nothing probably didn't help. I grew up in Texas later. I found out 2 of my classmates ended up being Qayyad in Iraq. I recall a handful of transfer students coming up to my university because they were enrolled in colleges that were destroyed by Katrina. Probably my funniest, in a dark way, memory of was my senior year of college. I was taking a business class the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, which was the first major sign that the economy was going off the rails. And my professor just casually said, "You all know this is how the Great Depression started." A girl next to me started hyperventilating, while the guy above me began to openly weep. My prof, seeing the dramatic emotional display, was quick to pivot, but I'm sure it won't be so bad. Probably not the best thing to tell a room of graduating seniors, but he wasn't wrong. Lol. I do think there was an acknowledgement that the world was tense and life was fragile. So I think art and music really began to transition over the decade. I've always thought that art is at its most vibrant when it serves as an escape for a dour or anxious populace. The decade began with a weird conservative undercurrent, probably boosted by the reaction to 911 Think blue-collar comedy tour. But by the end of it, that had largely faded away. You saw the hipster subculture, EDM, and a big emphasis on new technology. Social media and celebrity culture start to emerge by the end of the 2000s. Some of it was admittedly very lowbrow, but I wonder how much of Gen Z Gen Alpha's current anxiety cannot at least be partially attributed to the lack of cultural vibrancy that seems to exist. Seems like TikTok and IG have just sucked all the fun out of everything. But maybe I am just being a grumpy old man. Story 6 from User Stayed Gold. A tear comes to my eye. The year was 2004. The previous summer, I had finally mastered the elusive kickflip after tearing the trick tips pages from my Trans World skateboarding magazine. I had a radio that I plugged into an extension cord that ran the length of the driveway into the garage from the curb, so I could play my stepfather's CD collection for all the cul-de-sac to hear, as I tried to learn even the most basic of skateboarding tricks, armed with a Factor X ramp and the vague animations of Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I was led astray many times. The tune of choice that summer, as I recall, was D12's. My band, after that heady summer, I found myself plunged back into my pseudo-Christian public high school, bombarded with abstinence-only education messages ensuring my soul's damnation, body's disease-ridden form. There was rumor of a porn video that could be accessed on the school computers, which were CAR-T monitors embedded into a desk, such that we could work over our screens. 2 friends plagiarized an online review of Forrest Gump for our journalism class and got away with it. The video was found via a tube site that circumvented the schools. It blocks it involved a singular cup I dreamed of. Halo 2, its release was imminent. The previous years I had spent the entire night awake at my cousin's house plugging our Xbox into one another for 4v4 LAN parties. My mother knew of this game's importance, but she forbade me the midnight release instead. In all her blessed splendor, she retrieved the game for me from the store during her break and dropped it off at home, so that to my surprise, when I came home that fateful November day, the game was there. Most of 2004 is a blur from there. The smell of bagel bites takes me back sometimes, or the chords of Aphis sing the sorrow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and write comments. See you later.